You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we show business owners and entrepreneurs how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus their life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll help you diversify into real estate by equipping you with the tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo. Hey guys, Garrett here on the Reinvest Podcast. Down my co-host yet again, but you can't keep him down for too long. He will be back in action by popular demand. Excited though on our episode today. Before we get into it, I want to note two distinctions in real estate investing. There is active real estate investing and passive real estate investing. So we're going to talk about the active portion of investing in our episode with our guest today, but from a passive perspective, we, our company, Level 5 Capital, work with busy business owners, entrepreneurs, high-income earners who love real estate, don't have the time to be the active portion of it, but want to diversify into it. If you're interested in what that could look like for you, I will put our Calendly link in the show notes so that you can schedule a 15-minute call with me and see if that might be a good fit for you. But for all of you guys who are you're gluttons for punishment and you love kind of the active hands-on side of things, we've got some great stuff to get into today. And our guest today to help us unveil that is Mike Simmons. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
So this is kind of a charged episode. You're from a state that doesn't sit well in the collegiate football realm for Buckeye fans.
Yeah, likewise, my friend, likewise. And I just want to say right off the bat, I'm going to just have to formally apologize for stomping you guys out now for a couple of years.
Okay.
It's been pretty brutal, and I know it must be tough, so I'm sorry.
So this quite possibly could be the shortest podcast episode we've ever recorded.
Listen, you guys took us to task for a lot of years where we suffered until we kind of got our revenge.
You know, and I'm just going to blow the whistle on myself. I talk a big game. Quite honestly, if you were to start to quiz me on like the lineage of this rivalry, I would be embarrassed at how uneducated I am about Ohio State football and Michigan football. But what I was hoping you were going to say is you're a Michigan State fan.
Well, here's the deal. I had a daughter that graduated from Michigan State, and I have a son that graduated from U of M. So I kind of financially support both places. So I kind of feel like I have a little bit of allegiance to both.
You're towing the line. That's awesome. Well,
that's right.
It is cool to talk to somebody in the real estate scene who is in our neck of the woods. I mean, you're just a couple hours away. And one of your big niches that we're going to hopefully dive into today is wholesaling. And then you've really built on that. You've been doing it for a while, since 2008.
Yep.
A lot of guys got in the real estate scene in the last 5 years as things have become mainstream. Bigger Pockets has kind of put things out. At this point, doing something back in 2008, that kind of makes you old.
Yeah. The fact that I started investing in 2008 doesn't make me as old as the fact that I was born in the 70s. That's what really makes me old, right? And I will say, just for clarification, because I've done a lot of podcasts and I have my own, and I've said this a million times, so I don't want to be hypocritical. I started out as a house flipper in 2008. Did that for about 5 or 6 years, switched to wholesaling at that point. So I've only been wholesaling since about 2014.
Yeah.
But still, I guess I'm old. It doesn't matter. My birth date's the same no matter when I started wholesaling. I'm old.
Right. You were born in the 70s no matter what.
That's right. I was born in the 70s. Yeah.
Well, I think this would be a fitting time to kind of get into the origin story of how you got into real estate. Flipper 2008. Interesting time to be flipping houses. Okay.
Yep.
Stuck with investing through the financial crisis. Pivoted at some point to wholesaling. Walk us through that journey.
Yeah, for sure. So from Michigan, born and raised, automotive family. I was taught that you go to school, you graduate high school, and you get into the automotive industry, and you work, 60-hour weeks for 35 years, and you retire, and hopefully you're alive for a few more years. Like really, that was sort of the plan. A very blue collar, very union family, and so I did that. Graduated high school, spent a couple of semesters at a community college, mostly skipping class, so that wasn't great. Got into automotive industry, thought it was kind of the end all be all. That's where I'm going to be. This is what I'm told I'm supposed to do. I don't know any other plan. No one's
Like
ever presented
engineering
another
or
option.
mechanical or
When I got in, it was I was without an college education, so I was basically a grunt in the automotive
mhm.
industry. Worked my way up into sales, eventually got in kind of the white collar side of it, I guess, or like the program manager is really what I ended up doing in the long term. But the positions that I was trying to get to ultimately, like, it took me years to kind of work my way up and so that I was in a management position. But I'm looking at these directors and VPs and like, that's where I want to be. And those people were some of the most unhappy,
Yeah.
miserable, talk bad about their family and wives and husbands, like just hate life, hate their job, and they just bled company colors. And I'm like, this is
Hmm.
where their job is what I'm trying to get to, and they seem way more miserable than me. And I'm not thrilled with my job, but they seem more unhappy.
Right.
And so I started thinking that, maybe I need to look elsewhere, think differently a little bit, to quote Steve Jobs. And so I started investigating and investing just generally, like how do I invest to quit my job, kind of Google
Right.
searches,
Whatever that meant, wherever you needed to invest. It
whatever.
wasn't
At the
specifically real
time,
estate.
yeah, no, for sure. Well, at the time, I was actually thinking day trading, right? Back in the
Hmm.
early 2000s, like day trading was a buzzword and a popular thing, or people like to talk about it at least. So I started investigating trading, stocks and things. And I was reading, I'd read about it on Google, or at the time, I think it was Yahoo. I was reading about it, and it was boring as reading an encyclopedia. Like I was just couldn't take it. It was so boring. So I would find myself on ESPN and NFL.com, and I would just always be somewhere else at the end of the night. But if you scroll far enough on Google, if you just type in generally, investing for retirement kind of a thing, you eventually hit real estate, right? Real estate. And so I found real estate success stories and some of these early websites in the early 2000s. And I never got bored of that. I kept reading and just living through these success stories and these, um, testimonials of people who had done well. And I really thought this could be for me. Like this seems interesting and it seems like a path.
Hmm.
And this was in 2003. And so I made my decision. I'm going to be a real estate investor. This is how I'm going to escape the 9 to 5. This is my path going forward. And made that decision. And then the worst thing happened that can happen to almost anybody when they decide something is I didn't take action right away. I started reading more blogs. I started buying books. I started listening to podcasts and they were really podcasts, like downloading MP3s off a website, really. I started going to local RIAs, and I got into this education, hamster wheel
Yeah.
where, and I say it all the time, like, of course you need to educate yourself before you do things, especially if they're high risk, but education is also sort of like a sand trap, or like
Yeah.
quicksand. You can just be in it so long, that's all you do.
Yeah.
And I got to that point. And so fast forward 5 years of that, 5 years of research and education and telling myself that I'm doing kind of my due diligence, but really I was just avoiding risk is what I
Yeah.
was doing. And I told myself I'm just being prudent. And
Yeah,
so in
it's kind of an
2008,
endless thing, right? With the education piece, it feels
can
like
be.
progress, but really, it's not progress in the
Yeah.
things that matter. But it's kind of something
No.
you can hang your hat on out of insecurity,
Yep.
and you kind of know in your gut when you've hit that point of like, okay, at this point, it's more fear keeping me here than it is
Yeah.
trying to build a strategy.
100%. And that's exactly what I was doing. And plus, the more you learn, the more questions you have. Now you
Yeah,
have
right.
better questions and more educated questions. And it's sort of never-ending cycle. And I'm not really nowadays, I don't think of myself as risk. Matter of fact, I'm not risk averse. I probably have the opposite problem. But back then, it wasn't fear of losing money. It wasn't the traditional fear of like, oh, what if I invest money? What if I try this and it doesn't work and I lose money? None of that occurred to me.
Hmm.
My fear, because I worked in the automotive industry, and it's a fairly, um, I don't know, I don't, not to use profanity, it's a ball busting industry. People
Hmm.
love to watch people fail, and my fear was like for my reputation. Like I was afraid of looking stupid or making,
Right.
doing it, failing and having to come back with my tail between my legs. That was my big fear. But I'll tell you, the night it changed, I remember exactly when my mindset and my dedication and my resolve changed. I was at work. It was a Friday. It was about 8 o'clock at night. I normally am off by 5, but it was 8 o'clock at night. we had been, me and the guys that I managed, the builders that were kind of building the prototype that I worked on, had been there every night late until about 8 or 9 o'clock, right? Hadn't seen my family, hadn't seen my kids really to speak of in a week. And we're there on a Friday. Everyone's exhausted, everyone's frustrated. And the client, the customer was in the building that night. And I won't say which automotive company was in the building, but it rhymes with Dord. They were there. And
Tesla?
they were not
I'm
happy.
just kidding.
What's that?
Tesla?
Tesla, that's right. Um, and so they weren't happy. And the guy who was our liaison for Ford worked for Ford, came up to me and he said, "Hey, what's happening? Like, what's going on with this project? Why are we behind? Why are we in this situation?" And I told him the truth. And the truth was there was a little bit of shared blame because we got the designs from them and we had made some errors on our side putting it together. And I said, listen, here's the deal. Like the designs were a problem. We had to go back and get it redesigned. And, we had some of our own problems, things that we did wrong here. And I was just telling him the truth. And he was, a normal amount of speaking distance from me. He took another 2 steps forward, like nose to nose, basically.
Wow.
And he looked in my eyes and he said, "You are a bleeping liar." Didn't say bleep. And I was floored. I was like, wow, I can't believe he just said that to me. You know, like, dude, we're here at 8 o'clock at night trying to fix this thing for you. And he
Right.
just dressed me down. And so once it kind of resolved, I went to my boss. He was there. And I said, listen, Keith, this is what just happened. Like, I don't know what's going on here, but I said, we're not getting anything done. It's 8 o'clock. The guys are tired. It's just, we're well past being productive. And he looked at me and my boss now I work for him. And he said, you need to get your priorities straight. And I was like, wow,
Wow.
another gut punch. And I thought, I said to him, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I walked out. He thought I was agreeing with him, but what I
Yeah.
really was saying was, you are 100% right. My priorities are my family, my health, my
Yeah.
happiness, not this crap. Being called a liar by the customer and you telling me I'm not, basically not dedicated. And so I resolved that night to get out of my 9 to 5. And
Wow.
less than
And
a year later, I was out.
and that
So
thrust you kind of out of that analysis paralysis education mode was like
yeah,
every person when you're endeavoring to do something, be it a business, new lifestyle habit, something that's going to help you change your situation, there's always a rubber meets the road of like that realization, crap, I actually have to do this thing. Like thinking about it isn't going to help me get any further. And
yep,
action is that crucial component to it. And there is a lot of fear there, right? So that got you into flipping. How did the
yep.
flipping go, and what made you pivot to wholesaling?
So you know, in my little bubble of my town, I was a really good house flipper. We were being invited to RIAs to speak and talk about how we do it, and I was being celebrated. And this was after a couple of years, right? We started off kind of slow. It was my wife and I were doing it together, partners, and we were doing okay. In the first couple of years, we would do 2 or 3 a year, and then by like year 3 or 4, we're kind of in that 8 to 12 range, and we were like mini celebrities locally. And I kind of thought I had it all figured out. The problem was I was doing it so now looking back, I was doing it so like poorly. It was amazing that I was getting it done because
Mm.
my entire business was built on two keystones that I had no control over. One was a contractor and the other was a realtor. I trusted the realtor to run all the numbers, to tell me what I should buy it for, what it will sell
Mm-hmm.
for. I didn't do any of that. I didn't even look. I just trusted him blindly. And I had one contractor who was in absolute control of my rehabs. And on one particular house that we were working on, it was in my realtor's neighborhood, like literally where he lived, in the town he lived in, on the street he lived on. And so I really had no concerns about his comps or anything. Totally trusted what he said, bought it for what he said. I believed it would sell for what he said. And as we're going through this process, my contractor started doing what contractors unfortunately do sometimes. He
Mm-hmm.
started not showing up. He started, overcharging me and charging me for things that didn't need to get done. And he sort of imploded and started kind of shooting himself in the foot. And I had to fire him mid project.
Wow.
And I was able to get some other contractors in there to kind of piecemeal it and get me through. And I'm like, good, at least we got it done. It's going to sell. We're going to make a good profit. We're all good. We go to put it on the market, and after 2 3 weeks, nothing, like just crickets. And I go to my realtor, I'm like, what's going on? He's like, well, maybe we need to reduce a little bit. I might have missed a little
Mhm.
bit. I said, okay, let's reduce a little bit. That's fine. Reduce, reduce, reduce. And finally I went to him. We're almost at break even price if someone bought it. And I'm like, Rob, what's happening right now? Like, you told me it would sell for this, and we're far from that. And his response, I'll never forget. He said, well, you win some, you lose some. And I was
Mm.
like,
Mm.
oh, that cannot be the response I get from my guy who's in
Mhm.
charge of all my numbers. Like,
Right.
that's just not an acceptable. That's just a little bit too dismissive. And I said, all right, well, that's it for you. And so I had to let the contractor go and let the realtor go on the same
Wow.
project. And I still had opportunities coming in. There were deals that I was analyzing and trying to figure out if I should be doing them. And I didn't know what to do with those, but I knew there was one guy in town that did something called wholesaling, and I know he didn't flip them himself. I know he found them and sold them to other flippers, but I didn't know how he did it. I didn't know how it all worked.
Let me just pause you real quick right there.
Yeah,
What's funny is I knew this guy in my town who did wholesaling. And it sounds like you met him in a back alley somewhere, And it was kind of
yeah,
like you
yeah.
hush your voice when you say the word
I
wholesaling
know.
because
Totally. I,
it's kind of a
I
dirty
barely knew the
word.
guy. I barely knew the guy. I just knew he did it, and I didn't know what that even meant. I just knew the word wholesaling. Took him out to lunch. He told me, he showed, kind of laid out how he does things. And to be honest with you, like, I'm very grateful that he did that. It helped me a lot. I needed that push. But looking back and knowing what I know now, he wasn't a good wholesaler.
Right.
He sort
Right.
of knew the steps, but he wasn't doing it very well.
Yeah, the
But
execution was not there.
yeah, not really there. And he's still kind of doing it the same, I think. It's not awesome. But he kind of filled in some gaps that I had. And so the next deal that came through to me, I went and signed the contract with the homeowner, knowing I couldn't flip it. I knew I was going to have to do something else, but I signed it at 95,000. This was back in 2014, but signed it for 95,000 and called one of my best friends, house flipper at the time, and I said, "Hey man, I got this deal. I can't do it. I don't. My contractor flaked. My realtor told him the whole story. I said, but if you're interested, you could have it for 110,000."
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't tell him I bought it for. And he goes, "All right, let me take a look. Let me do some math here." Called me back 10 minutes later. He goes, "I'll take it. That's a good deal."
Wow.
Okay, great. Go to closing. Two
You're
weeks
like,
later, I get a
holy
check for
crap, it worked.
$15,000. Yeah, it worked. I was like, wait a minute. Not only did that work in Michigan back then in 2014, most house flippers, myself included, we were expecting to make 20, 25,000 maybe from a flip, a pretty good
Sure.
one. This was $15,000, and I didn't
Yeah.
do anything
You're at
really other than find
60%
it.
of the flip and your turnover time was, 4
Yeah.
months or 2 months versus like a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And I was like, that was awesome. And by the way, too, again, fast forward a bunch of years, I've taken a lot of personality assessments. I've done a lot of like work on myself. I know me now better than I did then, and I'm incredibly impatient. That is just something, it's a reality for me. And so wholesaling, getting that check in 2 weeks and like being done, like turning that thing that fast felt good. It just was satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been flipping for a long time. And honestly, the aggravation of appraisers and realtors and home buyers and banks and mortgage companies, I was over it. And anyways, the next deal that came through, very similar numbers, called the same guy, did a deal with him. 2 weeks later, another check for $15,000.
Wow.
And I never looked back. I was like, I
Wow.
don't even care if I could go back to house flipping. I never will. This is for me. This is what I like doing. And kind of went from there. And well, the funny thing you notice is when you finally do something that's a little more aligned with you and it makes you feel good,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're better at it. And
Yeah.
so I went from flipping, a half a dozen to 10 to 12 maybe houses on a good year. Within a year of switching my model to wholesaling, I did 100 deals within
Wow.
12 months.
Wow.
I just exploded because I loved it. It made sense to me. I loved the speed. I just loved it all.
So unveil that because there is when you say wholesaling and someone has a wholesaling business, that's a broad stroke of the brush. And there are the guys that like they're driving for dollars and they're doing all this stuff and they're kind of local wholesalers. And
Yeah.
you look at them and you're like, I don't really envy your life because you're buying these junk properties and there's a lot of liability. It doesn't seem like they're doing it right. So what's the difference from the guy that's trying to do it as a business, it's really a hobby, is not making a ton of money, versus the guy that's doing what you're talking about?
All right. I'll answer that question, but you made me think of something you said kind of at the top of the show. I'm a little bit contrarian when it comes to active versus passive income.
Mm-hmm.
I understand what you're saying, but I will tell you this in all honesty. This is not some sort of marketing hype or something I say to get attention. I do about 100, between 80 and 100 deals a year, depending, COVID, we went down a little bit, whatever, but I do in that range every single year since 2015. I spend an hour and a half tops in my business every week, right? Less
Every
than
week.
a lot of per week. And that's less than a lot of like landlords and things are more active. So the business is an active income business. That's factual, right? But and we can spend as much time or as little time as you want. How I got to that point, but I am not interested in working 80 hours a week in my business. If it took that, I wouldn't be in this business anymore. But I've been able to build a machine, a team, a process. I run it like a business. And the reason I'm telling you this now is it sort of dovetails into the question you're asking. What's
Right.
the difference between the guy running around driving for dollars and me? Is everything I do in business for sure. I as quickly as possible, try to figure out how to win that game, how to run it like a business. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
interested in running a lemonade stand at the end of my driveway with money in one hand and pouring drinks. And like, I
Right.
can't operate that way. I need this to be a tight business. Anything I do, I want it to be that way. And so the good news is when I first started in real estate, I was working a 9 to 5 for a number of years. And so I had some money saved up. So when I flipped to wholesaling, I was able to take the profits that I made on those first couple deals and put it all into marketing. And so the difference with me and a lot of wholesalers, especially in my market, I'm sure this is true all over the country. I don't make $15,000 from a deal and go buy a boat or go on vacation or buy a new car or put a deck on my house. I take
Right.
$15,000 on
Put
it
it
that I
back
made
into
on
the
a deal
business.
and I do $15,000 worth of marketing. And I did that pretty exclusively and pretty disciplined for the first 6 months that I was wholesaling because I knew the faster I hit critical mass, the faster
Yeah.
I get to
Right.
the point where my revenue supports the marketing, it's just going to snowball. And that's exactly what it did.
That's fascinating. And that is, you're right. It is contrarian to think because you think of a wholesale business. I picture people on the phones and I mean, all the stuff that is there, but you have a team of people doing that.
Yeah. And I
Um,
was that. I was what you just said for the first year, maybe 8 months to a year. Of course, it
yeah.
was me. You don't start off with a team. I had to work my butt off for the first 8 months to a year.
Yeah.
But within that time, I hired a salesperson who could answer phones and go on appointments for me because I was doing it because I was the owner. I wasn't the most qualified. I'm adequate at sales at best, but I hired someone who is a rock star salesperson. I mean,
Mm.
and the funny thing is he wasn't the guy that I hired wasn't a real estate person. He wasn't a realtor. He was a pharmaceutical salesperson.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
that's far from real estate. However, it pays well if you're good. If you're a good pharmaceutical
Oh,
salesperson,
yeah.
you can make big money. And he was. He was the best in the region. They were sending him on vacations as and giving him awards. He was great. He just didn't want to be in that industry. And he came and worked for me. And overnight, my business, went from here to here. Like to give you
Wow.
to put context to that, at the time, if I went on 5 seller appointments, on average, I would get one contract. On 5 appointments, I'd get one contract. Not
Okay.
terrible, not amazing, right?
20%. I mean, yeah, that's a good conversion rate.
Not bad, right? I hired this guy. He would go on 5 appointments of the same quality, same kind, nothing really different. He'd go on 5 appointments. He would get two and usually three contracts on five
Wow.
appointments. Now,
Wow.
at the time, I was averaging around $10,000 to $12,000 per contract per wholesale deal, right? So I tripled my revenue, and he more than paid for himself. And the amount of marketing that I could do with that money, I mean, I exploded because I took all of the revenue and everything and I put it back into the business in the form of more leads because I knew more leads would be more deals, which means I could hire more down the road. And I eventually partnered with that guy who I hired as my sales guy. He's my business partner now.
Wow. That is so crazy. So, I mean, this is just a good case study. I had some other questions and maybe we'll get to them, but like, let's keep following this train of thought. How did you convince a guy who was in pharmaceutical sales, killing it, to come work for a wholesaler?
It was kind of the other way around. He convinced me. He called me out of the blue.
Wow, he is a
I
good
think he heard my
salesman.
podcast. I think he heard my podcast. He called me out of the blue and said, not called me. I take that back. He emailed me. He emailed me out of the blue. He contacted me and he's like, hey, I was wondering if you'd ever be willing to go get lunch. I'd love to pick your brain about real estate. I'm sure it's happened to you, And a lot of times I say no, but this was very early on. And I was like, sure, somebody wants to talk to me.
I'm
Okay.
flattered, yeah.
Yeah. So I go out to lunch and he's asking good questions and we had a good conversation and it was a good conversation. I helped him as much as I could. He had just a lot of new person questions. He at the time was trying to build a rental portfolio and he had just bought his first property. And so he's asking me a lot of questions. So I did the best I could, answer questions. When we got done, within 20 minutes, I had an email from him. And his email summarized our meeting. And this is before AI. He didn't record it and have it AI. He typed out, these are the minutes. And then he had a list of bullet points of how he felt he could help me in my company. These are things I could do for you in your company if you're ever interested.
He shared that with you on the back end of the meeting?
He after the meeting, he emailed me that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I read it and I was like super impressed, right? And he's like, I would do all these things for free. I just want to be able to like be around and see what you're doing and ask you questions, but I'll do it totally free. And so I called him up and I'm like, hey, let's talk. Like, I don't want you to work for free, but let's talk. Let's see what makes sense here. And he told me his goal was to be in real estate. He didn't want to be in pharmaceutical sales. And so I hired him. He didn't quit his job immediately, but 6 months later, he gave him his notice. And he actually waited 1 extra month because he was about to receive an award and get a full, all expenses paid trip to Hawaii for being the best salesperson in the company. He's like, can I just wait 1 more month because they're about to send me to Hawaii? My wife wants to go, right? Yeah, exactly. So he came aboard and I mean, he was a rock star from day one. And that, this is like a hiring kind of takeaway, but I almost now, when I hire salespeople for my company, I almost don't want them to have real estate experience because sometimes you have to untrain something that they've learned or think that they know. What are
the bad habits that somebody would bring in on quote unquote having real estate experience?
Well, and I've made this mistake, and again, maybe some people do it, so I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't hire realtors to be salespeople in my company because I'm a wholesaler.
Right.
It's different than traditional retail sales, and you have to unteach them realtors look at a house and look at an opportunity in a much different light than an investor does. And they question my contracts. They question the legalities. They want to run everything by their broker. It's just a cluster. And I just I don't want anything to do with it. But
so much red tape that stands in the way of getting the deal done.
So much. Yeah. I would rather have someone who's completely naive about what's possible so you can kind of build the process into them and not have to tear down what they think they know to install what is real.
I am a full-time real estate agent, which is, it's funny to hear you talk about this. And I know exactly what you're saying. And we've had clients get frustrated at us before. And it's not because I think the intention is well. When you're a realtor, you're a licensee, you're tied into a governing body that you kind of feel like you have to adhere to.
Yep.
And fortunately, we work with a lot of investment grade real estate investors. So that exposes us to a lot of these kind of, novation agreements and sub 2 and, what title companies can do that they don't want to do, but is possible. Like all of that stuff that, they don't want you really to know as a realtor because it would, incur liability, whatever, yada, yada, yada. But I know exactly what you're talking about because I'm assuming most of your salespeople, you're wanting them to be solution focused. Hey, okay, you have these challenges. There's some people that, have an interest in the property. Mom and dad, passed away and you've got some siblings. We can figure all that out. That doesn't have to stand in the way of us doing a deal versus getting bogged down in the details of like, oh my gosh, what this is going to mean.
Yep. Yeah, wow. And for retail sales and because we don't represent sellers or buyers. That's not what we do. We're there to buy a property, right? Or reality is for a wholesaler, we're there to sign a contract and then facilitate the buy and sell, situation. Realtors, there's a lot of realtors out there that totally get what I do, and they're like, yeah, I totally get it. Because we deal with realtors constantly, all the time. We sell to realtors, and they bring us buyers, and some of them go like, hey man, I know exactly what you're doing. I totally get it. How
Yeah.
do we do this? Like, let's make it work. And then I have some realtors that go, you can't do that. You don't own the property.
Right.
You can't be involved in this. And it's like, okay, well, go tell your buyer that you just blew up the deal for them because I'm going to find a buyer. You're not going to obviously represent them, but
Right.
so it's fine, but it's hard. It's hard for them to reconcile the governing body that they have to answer to
Yeah.
while working for us, and I know a lot of realtors who are wholesalers too. They're full-time realtors, but they do wholesaling. It's like a hat, you take one hat off and put the other one
Yeah.
on, and you have
Yeah.
to have disclosures. Listen, I'm not representing you. I am not your realtor in this situation. Like there's ways to do it that it makes sense and everyone's okay with it. But some people are just very rigid in the way they see things.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to tell them anything otherwise. I've had people like harass me online, like, you can't do this. And it's like,
Well, they're
okay.
making the assumption that if you're wholesaling a property, you're having to take advantage of a seller, a little old lady, and lie to her about the value of her property in order to create opportunity. And, that's a blanket generalization.
Yeah.
At least the wholesalers that I work with, they're not having to do that. There's a way to do it above board to actually be
1,000%.
like
1,000%.
solution focused.
100%. There's definitely bad people in every industry, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's bad people in religious industries, right? There's just bad
Sure.
people everywhere. So let's just say there's bad people everywhere. It's not just wholesalers. It's not just real estate and everything, right? But one of the first things we do when we go into a house talking to a seller is we say, assuming it's a decent house, right? It's not a total dumpster fire. We say, this is a nice house. Why not list it? Why not just call a realtor and list this house?
Yeah.
The reason why we say that is we know they can't, or they wouldn't have called us.
Right.
Realtors are the first thought that most people have when they want to sell their house. Matter of fact, for most people, that's the only thing they know that they can do.
Right.
They don't know there's any other option. So by the time they get to us and they're calling us and asking us to come out, they've already realized, for whatever reason in their personal situation, it's not an option.
Right.
And so far from us to take advantage, I mean, you sell with a realtor, because we tell them you'll get more, you'll make more that way, you'll make top dollar that way, right? Oh, you can't do that? Why? Oh, you have to be out by the end of the month, which is 2.5 weeks from now. Okay, so let's talk and let's figure out what's going on and how we can help you if it makes sense, right? So yeah, there's bad wholesalers out there, no doubt about it. But I would also not, again, you'll get the sense I've had this conversation. I would say there's a lot of predatory realtors who tell someone that their house will sell for way more than they know it'll sell for
we call
to
it
get
buying
the listing, to get the listing, and then know they're going to reduce it to something reasonable, right?
Yeah.
But they say the high number to get them excited, right? There's this argument that could go back and forth. There are bad wholesalers, no doubt, but there's a way to do it very ethically and very above board. And by the way, we have people hugging us at closings. Like, we're definitely helping people, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, there is such a thing as a win-win. So let's do this. Let's get into 3 practical tools for somebody who is looking to source deals or wants to wholesale. And maybe some of these will be like little dangling carrots. You said, hey, I spend an hour and a half on my business a week. You didn't start there. You're there now. I'm sure everybody's asking, how is that possible? So, but what are some takeaways that people could apply to what we're talking about?
Yeah. So if you want to be a wholesaler and you don't love the idea of hustling all day long, and like you said, your vision of being on the phone, going on appointments, hustling, trying to find buyers, going to RIAs, like I don't do any of that stuff, because what I learned was, time is way more valuable than anything else. And so my goal was to look at what I'm doing in my business. And when you're starting out, you sit in every seat, you do everything, and it's busy, right? But you have to be critical and look at what you're doing that you're not great at. Right? Some of us and most of us have some superpowers. We're good at certain things and we do it, but there's things that you're just not good at. And you have to be honest with yourself. And I knew I wasn't good at sales. So that was the first thing I did, was try to find a commissioned salesperson. That guy I brought in who was a rock star, got 3 deals when I got 1. He worked straight commission because he still worked a 9 to 5, right? He was doing it in his spare time. And so there's a way to put this thing together so you're not like responsible for a bunch of salaries right off the bat, because that's uncomfortable when you don't have a business to support it. So you start looking for commission, part-time, people who can do things on the side, and start with what you're bad at. And, the second thing I knew I wasn't great at was, I'm not a detail person. I'm not great at looking at contracts and making sure everything is lining up. And so the second person I hired was a transaction person. They handle everything with the title company. They do all the paperwork. They look at all so that's how I started. And that freed me up to like market more and to figure out how to spend those marketing dollars. That was really like what started the fire and got that thing going. I just kept dumping it into marketing, hiring a few people that could take things off my plate that bogged me down a lot. Yeah. That's number one. Number two,
real quick on that. So first of all, hiring somebody, the idea of that, maybe somebody thinks, oh, payroll. Well, I'm not even a business yet to even have that. I don't even have an entity set up. It could be as simple as telling your friends and family, hey, if you have a real estate deal and you bring it to me, I will give you a portion of whatever I make on that. Sure. And you haven't obligated yourself to anything, but you're putting these little seeds out there that can work for you. That's number one.
Number one.
And you talked too about, what was the second thing you said? Oh, finding somebody to do the transactional type of stuff. Did you do that through a VA? Like, what did that look like?
No, I hired someone locally. I think actually I found him on Craigslist. It's 10 years ago, but I found him on Craigslist.
That's unconventional.
You know what? One of my biggest regrets in business is that hire. Not because I hired her. She was amazing. What I regret is the way I grinded her and crushed her soul and forced her out of the company. Because I did. She was so good that I kept giving her more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And she told me she'd messed up on something one time, and I was like kind of coming down on her. I was just all gas back then, and I was kind of coming down on her, and she's like, you know what? I wake up in the morning, I get a cup of coffee, and I get on my laptop. And she said, I fall asleep on my laptop every single night working for you. Wow. And I was like, wow, that hit hard and it hurt. And shortly thereafter, she left for another job. And I regret it because she was great. And had I treated her well and kind of kept her in her lane and supported her better, she'd probably still be with me. She was great.
Wow. How'd you spend the marketing dollars?
Yeah, it's a good question. Back then, 100% it was direct mail. I was putting it all into direct mail.
Wow.
And it was crushing. I spent that $15,000. I put that money into direct mail, and no, I take that back, not to $15,000. Before I made the $15,000, I spent $850 on a direct mail campaign, and I got a deal. And the next month after that, I spent another $850, and I got another deal. Now that doesn't work that way so much anymore. It's a little more saturated, but for the next 5 or 6 years, it was almost exclusively direct mail that I built my business on. And by the way, it still works.
Really? That's interesting.
100%.
All right. So I didn't mean to stop you there. So that was number one.
You're fine. Number two, I was going to talk about marketing. So, a lot of people when they're starting off, they'll do driving for dollars and all these things that are free, and that's fine, or relatively free. That's totally fine. But what I realized was, and this is the second thing, when you're doing marketing or you're trying to drive leads into your company, you need to have at your disposal either time or money. If you have both, that's great. Most people don't have both. They have one or the other. At the time when I kind of started down this wholesaling road, I happened to have money because I was doing deals, and I had some flips that were still like closing, and they were in the escrow and all that. So I had money coming in, so I dumped a lot of money in it. Now, if you don't have that money to put into your marketing, you have to spend time. I've had people come to me and say, I want to wholesale, and I work 80 hours a week, and I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. I have no money. And it's like, well, you got to get out of that situation first. Like, you got to figure that out, free up some time, free up that debt, try to figure that out. I can't just, I'm not Houdini. You put me in a straitjacket upside down in the water, I'm going to drown. I can't help you out of that situation. And I've actually turned people away, who wanted to pay me for coaching. And I just go, you're not in a position where I feel like you're going to win. Like, this isn't good. I can't take your money. You need to go pay your bills with this money. Don't give it to me. So that's number two, is time or money for your marketing. And if you have money, I can tell you the ways that I have seen over the years through coaching and just being around a lot of people. There's a lot of things that can work, but the things that I see, and again, if you're just starting off, maybe this isn't as helpful, but I have been lucky enough to associate and be around and get to talk to really high level real estate investors of all kinds. And I've spoken on stage with them, and when I get them private one-on-one and I'm talking to them, I've asked a lot of them, where do you get your deals primarily? Like, I know you just presented on XYZ. I get it. But between you and I, if I took one channel away from you that would cripple you or do the most damage, what would that marketing channel be if I took it away? Like, what would just devastate you?
These people tell you?
Yeah, of course, because we're just having a private conversation, and I'm not naming their names right now. But there's two things that they told me time and time again. One primarily, and the second one very close. The second one that if I took it away, it would crush them is Google AdWords, pay per click. Like
Oh, wow.
that's huge in the at least single family real estate. Let's just stick with that for now. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, like need to sell my house for cash in Lima, Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody Googles sell my house in Lima, Ohio. The first 4 or 5 responses, those are ads. People pay to be there. That is also a very big channel for us. But the number one answer, and I'll be fair, I asked this question within an 18-month period back around right before COVID, right around that time frame, 19, 20, somewhere in there. Far and away, the most common response, direct mail. Now, they might be up there presenting about pay per lead. They might be talking about, cold calling. They might be talking about hiring VAs. But most of these guys were like, direct mail is what pays my bills for me.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
so
wild.
It works. It still works. I show people how to do it all the time. So, and the great thing about it, it's very, you can throttle it up and down. You can do more of it. You can do less of it. You can really have that effect. It's hard to scale driving for dollars unless you hire a bunch of people, and that has its own problems. So anyways, time or money, for sure. You have to do that. And then, for me, I partnered with someone, and it's not for everybody, but if you find a really good partner, someone who complements your skill set, right? Don't hire someone who has the exact same skills, or partner with someone who has the exact same skills. But if you find the right partner, it can free up a lot of time for you and a lot of energy, and also have somebody else who's rowing the boat when it's time for you to rest, so you can kind of play off each other.
That's true.
And I've seen this a lot too. Maybe you have as well. As good of an entrepreneur as a person might be, not all of your ideas are great. And when there's nobody there to bounce an idea off of who has some
you don't
say
know when
in
one's
what
a
happens,
turd. Yeah.
you don't know when one's a turd, and you're gonna have some turds for sure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So partnerships, what was great about my partnership, or what is great about it, is we challenge each other a lot, right? If I bring an idea to the table, big idea for the company, he may agree with me. He may think initially that sounds like a really good idea, but he knows his job is to debate against it. He needs to argue it down. And if he can argue me down on an idea I just presented to him, and he can bring enough heat that I have to go, yeah, maybe you're right. Like, it's not a great idea, right? So we're constantly battling in a productive way. We're kind of battling over these ideas to make sure if something wins, then it's really good. If it can't win, it's probably not that great.
If you're listening to this podcast episode, one thing that I appreciate about you, Mike, is the stuff that you're talking about. You can tell all of this came through just experience of getting reps in. And it's like, yeah, I learned this. And, oh, yeah, I did that. I wish I wouldn't have pushed her so hard because she was a great employee. Like, this is just a great lesson in being in something long enough and actually listening to that feedback and learning from your mistakes. So, first of all, thank you for that. We're going to transition into what we call our smaller pockets.
Okay. Do we have
Smaller pockets. So.
Oh, I thought there was like a song you were about to play. You looked down. I thought you were going to cue like music. I was like, is that an intro song?
It does. Well, it's got a. Did you hear the show segment? You didn't, did you? On our end, it's like a wah, wah, wah.
No, I didn't hear it.
Oh, bummer. All right. Well,
No.
we did. So you were right. Your instincts were correct. And our listeners will hear that. So this is a part of our show where you talk about a painful deal, something that didn't go right. Get specific about it, and what did you learn from it?
I can get super specific. Yeah, there's one that jumps out. So I spent a lot of years in this industry never losing money on any deals, and it was sort of a point of pride. I would talk about it. I've never lost any money on a deal.
Yeah, what a great accolade to be able to kind of like put out there.
Yeah, it was awesome. It almost might have been a curse because eventually it happened, right? So I'm a wholesaler, and I had this deal in my market. It was we bought it for $350,000 in Michigan in 2018.
That's a wet bite for a wholesale.
That's considered a high-end property in the area for sure. That is not cheap. If you're listening in California and laughing to yourself, it's very, very expensive piece of property in Michigan, especially at the time. So had this under contract, had a buyer, everything going great. This also kind of like, when things go wrong in your company, it causes you to create processes to not have that happen again. And this is no exception. So we had this thing under contract. $350,000. I think we were wholesaling it for like 375. So it was going to be okay. It was going to be a decent deal.
Mm-hmm.
Buyer comes to us last second. By the way, our contracts, our our purchase agreements that we have with our sellers have an expiration date. They're not, we can't just hold them hostage forever.
Yeah.
They usually they're 30 days, and at 30 days the contract just cancels, and they can re-sign if they want, but they're
Do you
free
ever
to
have
do
to
it.
do any earnest money to get these tied up?
We don't, and I know that makes you cringe as a realtor, but we do not do earnest money. Why don't we do earnest money? People don't
If you
ask
don't
for it.
have to, why would you?
We don't have to. We
Yeah.
don't have to. If someone asks us for it, like, hey, aren't you going to put earnest money down? I would like that. We do. But 100 deals times, let's just say
Oh, that's so much
$1,000
to
in earnest
manage.
money. Like,
Oh,
it's just a
yeah,
lot of money out there that is doing nothing for us.
for sure.
But anyways, no earnest money down. But the buyer backed out at the last second. And at the time, we didn't have a policy in place like we do now that says whatever our purchase agreement says with the seller that the contract is going to, it cancels out like at this date. We want to make sure that the closing is at least 1 week prior to that. So we have recovery time if something goes wrong at the last minute. We didn't have that policy in place. So we had a buyer. He canceled the day before the contract expired, like at 4 o'clock the day before it expired. So it was like the day was over. And I was furious. I was riding a high of, scaling my business up to 7 figures really fast. And, things are going great. To be honest, I was cocky. I really thought I could do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And this buyer backs out. At the time, and still, we had a lot of lenders that were willing to come in and do short-term loans for us. And we had a lot of money sitting on the sidelines. And I said, I can take this thing down. Like, I'll take it down and we'll flip it. I flipped houses years ago. I can do this.
Yeah.
So we took it down.
Was that
by the way,
because you didn't want to let the deal go, or you felt an
Yes.
obligation to the seller?
Both. I'll be
Okay.
fair. I mean, at the time, if you would have asked me, I would have said because we had an obligation to the seller. But
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest,
Yeah.
I was really cocky that I just could do anything. It didn't
Sure.
matter.
Right.
Now here's the red flag I didn't see. This deal only had one buyer. There was only one person who even sniffed this deal, and he backed out at the last second, right? Should tell you there's something not right here. But we did have an obligation to the seller for sure. That's definitely part of it. And they had a disabled child and they couldn't let people come through the house. It was kind of a mess. And so I just come in and said, I'll do it. Like, we'll just do it. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took the house down. We bought it. We kind of did light renovation. I didn't do a full renovation because it was going to be an expensive renovation. Put it on the market, didn't sell, took it off the market, did a little bit more, put it on the market, didn't sell, took it off, did a little bit more. Like the worst thing, we were chasing these numbers
costs,
down.
I know. Wow.
Holding cost, and we were chasing this thing. We were chasing the market down a little bit. And end of the day, and also here was my other mistake. So in wholesaling, there's a position in your company called dispositions. The dispositions manager's job, for anyone who doesn't know who's listening, is to take that purchase agreement that your salesperson gets and find an end buyer, a house flipper, landlord, whoever is going to buy it. Like their job is
the asset.
Yep. And so I put my dispositions manager in charge of the rehab. He had never rehabbed a house before, and this was a big rehab. Why did I do that? Because I had flipped houses for years, and in my brain, this is easy. This is
Flooring,
so obvious what
paint,
has to
call
be
a couple
done.
Contractors, yeah.
It's not a big deal. It's not rocket
Landscaping,
science, right?
Yep.
And I put him in charge. I gave him a budget, gave him access to the budget, didn't check in on him for months. And at the end of the day, we lost just over $100,000 on one deal. Just over, like $104,000. Now, we had everything go wrong. Holding costs, you mentioned. We had contractors that we paid ahead, and he took the money and split. All kinds of crazy.
And that was because
things.
your disposition manager didn't know any better to do half for materials, half upon completion.
Didn't know. He gave way too much, and we just tons of money, and I lost $100,000. Now the bright side is our business was profitable enough, and we've been around long enough money in the bank that we could weather that storm.
Yeah.
But devastating, and it was humbling. And I realized, and I was mad at my dispo guy. Like at first, my first reaction was because this is how I managed back then. It's like no hugs. It's just all gas, and we just torch people if they made mistakes. And it's terrible, but I got on his case, and blah, blah, blah. And it took me about a year, honestly. And he took it. He didn't make excuse. Like he said, yeah, you're right. It took me about a year to go back to him and go, dude, that was my fault. That wasn't your fault. That was my fault. I was the one who had experience. It was my job to make sure that you didn't fail. You work for me. You've never done a flip before.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
totally gave him all that power. And he did what most people would do. They make mistakes.
Yeah.
He had never flipped a house, right? So that's far and away the worst deal that's ever come down the pipe for us.
Great leadership lesson, though, because a lot of guys, to be honest, they never come back and say, hey, the buck stops at the top. I didn't give you the tools to succeed. And, that's
Totally.
predominantly on me. Wow.
Dude, I've gone a long way in with management and leadership. I was horrible. Me and my partner both, we were the same. We're super type A, super high energy, and we just turned and burned people. We'd hire them and we'd just fire them within 90 days if they weren't crushing, right?
What changed?
With no help, really. We didn't really support them.
What changed?
Having enough people coming. And by the way, it's expensive to hire and fire. Like it's, there's a lot of opportunity costs that you lose, right?
Of new people, yeah.
Yeah, turning over people is expensive. And at some point, at first we're like, that guy's stupid. That guy's lazy. That guy doesn't care.
Yeah.
They're his fault, her fault. And at some point, we both came to the realization it can't be everybody else all the time.
Wow.
It must be us. And so we
Wow.
started kind of looking inward at what we were doing. And one of the things we did that was really important, and we didn't do this early on, we kind of thought everyone should cross-train. Everyone should kind of know everybody's job. The problem is, nobody feels responsible for anything because there's so much coverage and things drop. So we really made it a hard line in our company that people stay in their lanes. If you're a sales guy, you do sales. We don't want you dealing with transactions. We don't want you dealing with the buy. Like you do sales and sales only, but we expect you to do well in that position. And we kind of gave everyone these silos, which is really counterintuitive because a lot of people say, no, cross training, it's great. Everyone can help out. That's fine. But for us, silos, because we also started using Traction, the book Traction. We started using that as sort of a guide for how we run our business. And, Traction preaches to everyone every week, everyone should have a number that they're responsible. One thing that they're responsible for, this number that they have to report to the team. And it's hard if they're doing a lot of different crazy things. So everyone got their one thing, their one number to know if they were on track and kind of like their North Star. And it really helped us turn things around. And people really appreciated just knowing what they were responsible for and being laser focused on that.
Well, if you're going to grow at some point, you have to, if you want to grow your company, it's going to involve growth yourself. And if you're not ready for that, then you're just going to spin your wheels. So awesome stuff. Okay, we're going to go into what we call our little nugget. So, Mike, this is part of the show where you give our listeners one tried and true principle or a hack. Could be big, could be practical in their business development or personal growth.
Okay, so this is my hack. This is going to seem old school, man. We established at the beginning, I was born in the 70s, guys. I have tried everything for personal growth. I'm not personal growth. Productivity is the word I'm looking for. Productivity. I have a cat's brain. I struggle to focus. I won't call it ADD, but I have a hard time staying on task. I get very distracted. So what I do, you can't see this off camera right here. I have a big whiteboard that has everything on it for the week that I need to get done. And it's in a position where I have to see it when I walk to my desk. So as I go to my desk and back and forth all day, I'm constantly looking at it. That helps me stay very, very focused on what's the most. It doesn't have 100 things on it. There's usually 5, maybe 10 things tops, and I cross them off as I do them. For me, that helps me remember and stay focused on the most important thing. Now, I will say this too. I've never mentioned this anywhere else ever, and this sounds like very promotionally, but it's really not. Because I was so obsessed with finding an electronic solution to my productivity problems, I tried, Asana and all these different apps that are out there. I finally got tired of it and created an app that's for me, and no one even knows about it except me and you and your listeners now. I've never talked about it. But it's finally, I've spent 3 years on it. It's out of beta. It's not intended to be a big moneymaker. It's not, I don't even care if I ever make money on it. But it's useful because here's what it does well. It helps you prioritize your tasks. You give it when you first put in a task, you have to tell the app if it's like important, if it's critical, like it has all these parameters, and then it assembles them according to your inputs on what's most important and spreads them out through the week, no more than 3 to a day. And nudges you throughout the day with increasing intensity when something is supposed to be done that day. It can text or email you or just send you a notification, and it gets more aggressive throughout the day. That's what I need. Like, I have an assistant, and she constantly is telling me, I'm sorry to nag you, but you told me. I said, nag away, because I need these prompts. Anyways, the app is called Task AI. If you want to check it out, go and check it out.
Oh, so it's like a public thing already.
Yeah, it's public. Well, already I've been working on it for 3 or 4 years, so it's taken a long time. But yes, it is available to the public. It's called Task AI, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It's very simple. It doesn't do a lot. It does one thing really, really well. That's it.
So this is going to segue into the next question. What's been one of the best resources for your business development? And you can't say Task AI.
No. Okay. Best resources for my development. I mean, it's not like something secret, but I think too many, wholesalers for sure, real estate investors are really late to the game to adopt a CRM. I think it's just so important.
That's true.
And you'd be surprised how many people who are making pretty good money in real estate are still doing things on Excel sheets and like yellow notepads. Like, it's just crazy that they don't adopt a CRM. And the reason is, obviously, most people know what CRMs do, right? Customer relationship management. It helps you keep track of like your ongoing conversations. But more importantly, maybe, it keeps track of leads that never really materialized in a database, so that you're constantly mining that database, because there is a lot of money in there. There's a lot of people who
follow up.
100%. There's people who just weren't ready when you talk to them, but they will be ready in 3, 6, 9, 12 months.
And how many times have you, as a real estate investor, driven by a property, tried to get in touch with them, and then 6 months later you see somebody putting a dumpster out in front of it and bought it? And you're like, that was the house that I wanted. You know what I mean? And it's because you didn't have a system to follow up with those people, plain and simple. So
early on, that did happen to us a lot, for sure. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but I'm sure it happens. Right?
Yeah, CRMs closed the back door, and 100%. We were late to implement that, and we were like, shoot, we're stupid. We should have done this a while ago.
Super important. You'll never find it, and maybe you would disagree, but you're never going to find a CRM that's perfect.
That's true. You have to pick
never.
one.
You just pick the one that you will use, that you will actually use, and just realize it will have some flaws, and it's fine. And if you're constantly looking to fix the flaw with the next CRM, it's just going to have a different leak in a different spot. Trust me. Just pick one and go with it and use it. That, the best CRM is the one that you'll actually use, is what they always say, right?
Yeah, that's true. So, Mike, how can people find out more about you and follow your success?
Yep. Pretty simple. You can go to mikesimmons.com and get everything there. There's one thing I am really excited about right now, really kind of pushing. It's free. It's a newsletter. I started a newsletter. It's called the Investor Cheat Code. If you go to investorcheatcode.co, you can go there. The cool thing about it is, other than just getting tons of insights and strategies for growing your business, every single week I give you something for free, some tool that I use in my business. 100% free. Sometimes spreadsheet software, sometimes other things, but every week I'll give you something that you can just take and implement in your business, and it's totally free. So go check that out.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, that is a great way to just take an actionable step to start learning a resource like that. So, Mike, thank you so much for taking time today, talking about wholesaling, talking about real estate investing, and just imparting and downloading business experience over the last decade of what you've been doing. So it's been a blessing.
Yeah, I've had a good time, and I appreciate you doing this. I really do.
Awesome, man. Thank you. As always, excited that you joined us for another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to learn how you can use your hard-earned capital to diversify into real estate, go to our website, lv5capital.com, and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. We'll see you next time.